sponsored by the Alliance for Social Bill of Rights, the president of which is Professor Richard Dean Winfield. I'm Renee, I'm the secretary of the organization, and today we invite your questions and your queries about how local government can ensure policies that give us all access to affordable housing. So with that, I let Richard Dean Winfield take the floor.
I just want to say a few general things to set the stage. Then the plan was that I had been expecting at least 3 of our city councilors to be here. They said they would be here. And to have them first say what they are planning to do to address our right to affordable, decent housing, and then to have people first from different housing organizations to speak about their specific ideas for what the city government can do, and then to open it up to everyone's thoughts and comments. The purpose of this meeting, like those of the other forums we're organizing, is to try to see what our new city government can actually do to fulfill our social rights. I think we all know that under the current political situation, we can't expect too much at the federal level until 2021. We can't expect too much at the state level until who knows when. But we should be able to expect something now from our city government, at least given what they pledged to do in their campaigns. And it seems that we have a majority on the city council and a responsive mayor who, at least in terms of their statements, are supportive of measures for fulfilling our social rights. Now, the right to fair housing is recognized as a fundamental social right by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted by the United Nations and signed on by the United States and most other nations in 1948. However, as we all know, our Constitution at a federal level and our state constitutions completely ignore any commitment to decent housing as a matter of right. Yet it's obviously a fundamental right. If you do not have decent housing, you can't function, you can't exercise any of your other rights, you can't take care of your family, you can't participate equally as a citizen. Now, here we are in the richest nation in human history. We currently this year have more than 1.5 million people who will experience homelessness. Every night, more than 500,000 people will be roaming the streets to check in at a homeless center or to live under a bridge or just there with the cold. We have 30 million dwellings that are unfit for habitation but are inhabited, that are infested with vermin, with pollution, with unsafe heating and electrical connections. And this is partly because landlords are not properly maintaining them. Also, there are people who may own these homes but don't have the resources to keep them in proper shape. Now, landlords are taking record rentals. The income coming to landlords is now a higher share of our national income than it has ever been in American history. Rentals in the last 20 years have gone up by 100%, while wages have stagnated. Home prices nationally have gone up considerably, while income has stagnated. And more of our populace finds it difficult to obtain the housing they need and to have enough money left over to take care of their other basic needs. Now, it's obvious, I think we all are aware, that to fulfill our right to housing, we have to ensure that people have a decent income, that we, in some respect, eliminate unemployment, that we eliminate poverty wages and poverty benefits. But even if we were to do so with such measures as a federal job guarantee, a national fair minimum wage, equivalent replacement income for disability and retirement, that still does not guarantee that there's an adequate supply of affordable housing, be it rental or home owned. And this requires action. And that action, in a way, has 3 broad areas that can be pursued. One is regulating the private for-profit market for rental housing and for homes. And there are all sorts of various initiatives that can be taken, things involving trying to regulate rental rates, regulate, in some respect, the supply of different kinds of housing, regulating home prices, regulating mortgage rates, regulating down payments and the like. All of these are measures that can be taken nationally, at a state level, at a municipal level. But on the other hand, there's no guarantee that even with regulation, the market will provide what is needed. So there's another arena of which we have some participants here, namely what's called the social housing arena, where we have nonprofit private organizations coming up with resources to provide affordable housing, some of it rental, much of it home-owned. Now, to get a sense of the scale of such initiatives, we have representatives from some of the major social housing nonprofits in the nation, Habitat for Humanity, Spencer Fry, and then the Athens Land Trust, and we have a number of representatives who are providing.
Monica Wiggy. Thank you.
And they're providing affordable housing, some with sweat equity, as in Habitat for Humanity, where the people who get the homes also participate in building them, and other homes where they, land trust, where they will not own the land, but will own the house at a decent rate and be able to sell it off at a good rate and have it put on the market at an affordable price. Nationally speaking, according to the annual report of Habitat for Humanity last year, almost 17,000 homes were provided through this sweat equity. Nationally, all of the land trust operations in the United States provided a little bit less than 19,000 homes. Now, that isn't an appreciable number, but we have to recognize that that is a drop in the bucket in contrast to the real need that we face. The other avenue, in addition to social housing, is public housing, where government, be it federal, state, or municipal, steps in directly and either constructs affordable rental housing or provides housing that then can be transferred to the ownership of people. One thing to keep in mind in all of these endeavors is that we have to think about what kind of architecture for democracy we want. You know, we've had types of development in terms of suburbanization and urban renewal that have tended to isolate residences apart from work, from public facilities, from shops and factories and so forth, and done so in a way that involves much greater usages of fossil fuels and energy and utilities, has tended to segregate rich from poor, African American, other people of color from whites, old from young, and to, in the process, exacerbate the conditions of those who are most impoverished. So we have to think of not only addressing the fundamental need for housing, but the kind of housing we want. And here I'm asking all of you to talk specifically about what our city government could actually do. They face a lot of limitations because of our state government. For example, other cities across the nation have rent control or rent stabilization, where they keep the lid on increases in rentals. I believe our municipal government is prohibited from doing that. Other cities have attempted to require developers to set aside a certain number of housing for affordable units. I believe our state government does not permit our locality to do that. So we have a lot of limitations, but nonetheless, we have our imaginations and our ability to think out of the box. So I would like us to do that today. Unfortunately, we don't have the city representatives yet here. I was hoping that we could pin them down on something, but hopefully we'll have another chance to do so. So I'd like to first then pass the floor to people who are involved in these various initiatives regarding housing. And Spencer, why don't you begin with your experience?
My name is Spencer Fry. I'm the Executive Director for Habitat for Humanity. I'm also the state representative for House District 118. I got into housing by accident, really. I was asked to be the first construction manager of Habitat for Humanity. And I'd always been told that we needed to buy a home as a family. I've lived in trailer parks, I've lived in apartment complexes, but we always knew we were working towards home ownership. Actually had a couple of folks here in town help me buy my first home. So when I got the call from Habitat, say, hey, we want you to be the first construction manager, they only had 2 employees. I said, okay, yeah, I'll do this for a year. And that was 1999. And I became the director. What I realized was offering people the opportunity to own their home, and then now like we do some affordable or low-cost rentals. It's just something that I couldn't get away from. I think it's incredibly important. I've always, after I became elected, the mayor and commission, they come to us and they say, hey, we want to give you a list of stuff that we need done. And it occurred to me after about the second or third time that I was their constituent and I represented their constituents, and I could turn around and give them a list of things that I wanted done that based on my experience with my constituents. And so about 3 years ago, I don't have my list with me, but I can tell you some of the items. I gave them a list of things that they could do that would help housing become lower cost in Athens. Now, you'll hear me say lower cost housing, low cost housing. It's because the words affordable housing mean different things for different people, right? If you're making $30,000 a year and $30,000 a month, an $8,000 a month house payment is considered affordable. But what we want is low cost housing, not necessarily affordable housing. There's plenty of affordable housing out there. I think changing that vernacular also gives an idea that it's not the person's responsibility that they can't afford the home, it's the community's responsibility that there is no housing that they can live in, okay? So there's a difference in that. There's a reason to change the vernacular on that. This all it really stemmed from, do y'all remember when Ort got arrested because he had trash in his yard? And they sent a guy to jail because he didn't have the capacity to get the trash out of his garage. And all it was boxes of old records, right? Instead, they should have gotten a mental health counselor over to talk with Ort. So that really activated me in a way that I hadn't been activated before. And I really was upset that somebody could be put in jail because they had boxes of records in their garage. And complaints by neighbors around him that had more money and probably could have handled the situation than he did. And that's not what we need to be doing. So part of that list was, and the idea being that if the state does preclude us from putting market constraints on our housing stock, then we should be able to, within those constraints, try to create more availability. Smaller lot sizes. That is key, I think, to, if we talk about affordability, lowering the cost, we need to create more stock, okay? Smaller house sizes. We're in the middle of a project right now at Habitat called the Kinda Tiny Home Project. And we had to call it the Kinda Tiny Home because we couldn't build a tiny home because Athens Clarke County has 1,000 square foot minimum. And the only reason that you could build a smaller than the 1,000 square foot minimum is if you're on a multifamily piece of property that's zoned multifamily, which interestingly, no one that has multifamily property would want to put smaller houses on it because you can fit more people into a multifamily property, right? Except us. So I just happen to have some multifamily zoned lots, and we're like, well, we can't call them tiny houses, so we're going to build some 700 square foot homes and call them kind of tiny. Now these will be the first LEED certified market homes available in Athens Clarke County, so we're really excited about that. But that's one of the things, these housing sizes, these laws were created to preclude certain people of a certain income from being able to move into certain places. That's the only reason. And you see across the state, they have codes about minimum square footage, thousands small for the state. A lot of them are 1,400 plus a garage. Some of them are 14 plus a 2-car garage. I mean, that's like another 50, 60,000 bucks right there in a construction project. So I think that's a key one. Why can't we let people live in what they want to live in? And I think that's important. Accessory dwellings, we outlawed accessory dwellings a long time ago.
What are those?
Like a garage apartment.
Oh, geez.
And so it's very difficult to get a permit to build another building that you could live in behind your home. What they'll do is they'll let you, but you can't put a kitchen in it, okay? So you can build a garage, you could have an apartment, but you can't do a kitchen.
Do you know if the parking minimums that you touched on are regulated at the state level?
Parking minimums, that's only city.
Okay.
You're talking about like how many cars, spaces you need?
You
per-
mentioned like garages as.
Yeah, so
a
that's
square
not, that
foot
wasn't a
minimum.
parking minimum, that's a community standard, like some communities, I think Cobb County.
In a Coney, you have to have a detached 2-car garage in order to build a house.
Yeah, that's 40 grand. I mean, you
I
can't, you
mean,
can't touch that without spending 40,000.
It has to be detached and 2-car, yeah.
So effectively, another different kind of parking minimum.
Yeah, it is it's more of a restriction placed on construction in order to drive the cost up. That's exactly what it is, And you bring up a great point, something that it's not on my list that I just made, but the idea that we want Athens to be a walkable community, but we require X amount of parking places for business Y, Z, right? And our homes, you have parking requirements for your homes. It's like, why? Why not? I just don't see the need to try to regulate those things, and it does drive up the cost. Code enforcement should be complaint-based, not patrol-based, right? If I got a problem with Richard's grass and he lives next door, I should go to Richard and say, hey, come on, we can cut your grass, or I'll help you cut your grass. Maybe Richard had a problem cutting your grass. That type of stuff. It doesn't affect me when code enforcement tries to mess with me, which because of my grass they might sometimes. It affects people of the much lower incomes that are just barely surviving. They do not need the city coming by telling them what's the problem. Driveway codes, oh my gosh, that just drives up the price of all sorts of housing. When they invented, we called them the driveway czar. Now you can't put a driveway within 50 feet of another driveway, and the concrete has to be X amount of inches thick, which, that just drives up the cost. Every time you make a rule about the construction of a dwelling, you're driving up the cost of it. One that's a little more controversial that I've seen ebb and flow was the no more than 2 unrelated people can live in the house policy. That a lot of these policies stemmed from the fact that University of Georgia had some of the smallest amounts of student housing of any major public university, and we didn't have all the apartments that we have now, and you saw a lot of the wealthier neighborhoods getting inundated with students, and so that was kind of locals trying to balance that out. And then the last one, which is we had a piece of legislation this year that we were looking at is just every kind of design constraint that you place on a house is gonna cost more. So that's my list based on the local issues, some of which I did present and have presented annually to the mayor and commission to see if they would address. I don't think we've had one issue on my list addressed yet. And so don't quote me on that. I gotta check my original list, but I don't believe we have. And with that, I'll let somebody else.
Two representatives from Athens Clarke County.
Well, yes, I'm Monica McGee. I'm the Assistant Director for Athens Land Trust. I'm a retiree, or at least I thought I was. And I'm new to Athens. I've been here 1 year. But I have a background in affordable housing or low-cost housing. I retired from the Birmingham Housing Authority as their grant writer. I ran a homeless shelter for teenage mothers and apartment complexes for teenage mothers. And so my history in working with nonprofits has forced me to educate myself on how to find a place for people to live. And working here in Athens, I would not say to you that I'm the authority, because I am not. But what I have been able to observe is that we have a multi-layered, multi-tiered situation that needs to be addressed here. We have some blighted and out of stock, just maybe even air property that's, if you drive the streets, you can see it throughout many of the neighborhoods here. And no one really is coming in to intervene or to research or to find out who owns it. And if there is an owner, what can be done to make this property usable again? For many of our residents, we have senior citizens here, quite a number as a matter of fact, who are unable financially to bring their houses up to code, to fix the properties, to get them to where they can even live in them. We have a program at Athens Land Trust called the Young Urban Builders. How many of you are familiar with that? Okay. So sometimes you can drive down the street and see our builders working on those homes that are occupied by our senior citizens, and we make the repairs, we do the renovations, and we charge absolutely nothing. That's necessary in a city such as this one. In addition to that, we're also looking at how can we create a pool of qualified buyers. We've got many people who has been sold on the American dream of owning a property, but they just don't know how economically to position themselves so that they can qualify. We don't just qualify people to purchase our homes. We try to qualify people to build economic growth, whatever their dream is, whether it's owning a business, whether it's just getting a lot, owning a property, whatever your dream is, we have a person in-house that works with that person to get you on that path. And right now, affordable housing is such demand. What is the poverty rate here in Athens, I believe, is 34%. Am I correct? Yeah. So the poverty rate is directly related to the lack of employment.
Mm-hmm. And the low wages.
And the low wages, yes. So when you don't have enough money to pay the rent, and you're not going to get a raise anytime soon, finding a suitable place to live is quite difficult. In our homes, we don't just sell them, we also lease purchase them. Because we know that sometimes the person's wages may increase over a period of time, so we put them in decent housing so that they can build equity, build their income, and strengthen their finances before they even think about purchasing a home. And one of the hidden factors, because I'm a senior citizen, is the fact that we've had at least 30 years of people working, thinking that their Social Security check was gonna be enough to cover their living expenses, their medicine, and their house. And for those of you who don't know, it is not. It is not. And many of us who work didn't earn the types of salaries that allowed us to have a pension plan. So we really were depending on Social Security to carry us through. And we have the largest number of retirees right now in the baby booming generation. My generation, we're tired of working and we want to sit down. But that also may mean that we won't have a roof over our head, because we've got to choose now. So we need housing stock that can address the senior citizens' needs, people with disabilities, low-income earners, and how do we structure that? How do we have a conversation, a meaningful conversation with our government for them to see the vast array of the need and begin to create pipelines to be able to address them and with whatever resources we have here coming to the city. How are the dollars coming to this city through CDBG and other means being funneled out?
Can you think of specific proposals you would want the city government to institute?
I would like for them to, as you said, when you organized this event, I need to know what your plan is first before I can begin to modify.
We are here from Athens Area Homeless Shelter, and along with the same of what are the plans to address the concerns that are being brought up about having options for affordable housing. So we work with families that are experiencing homelessness, and one of the things that I feel like has been left out of the narrative a lot is the steady increase of families that are in that situation in our county and in surrounding counties, really across Georgia, across the nation. But the conversation about providing housing and affordable housing plans, the families that are needing access to that, I feel like are not included within that conversation. A lot of times, things like panhandling come to the forefront, and that's not a valid conversation to have. But what we've seen since 2008 to 2018, the end of the school year in 2008, there were around 200 children that were experiencing homelessness in Clarke County. At the end of 2018, it was over 800 children in Clarke County. And everyone always has that face because we don't hear that. We don't hear about the fact that that is a growing issue in our community. And so I think just having the city council members aware of that, and how the families that are experiencing homelessness in our community they're faced with additional barriers, including childcare, transportation. Those are things that, but also their wages. So if it's a single income earner and they've been working at the same place for 10 years, and that is an institution within the community and they've never received a raise, and a medical issue comes up, and this is real situations that we've seen within the past 2 years, and medical or even needing to pay for asthma medication, which the asthma is exacerbated by substandard housing. And so I think that, and then they experience homelessness or an eviction, which then creates the situation of the higher likelihood of experiencing homelessness. So I think awareness is a major part that I would love to see our city council members aware of, but also holding landlords accountable for the standards that tenants are living in, and there's not a lot of tenant rights, but maybe there's some city options that can provide tenant rights, or more of a ground to stand on if there is maybe a mold concern. They have not been able to save up the money for a security deposit to move to a new place. And so then there's an experience of homelessness. And so that we just see that too much. And so I think that including that, and I know that all of these organizations work a lot with families and are huge supports for families. And so from families with young children to, we also see a lot of grandparents raising their children, and then that completely ties in with they expected that their income was going to be able to sustain them, and they can't sustain that housing, and they are working their tails off to provide that housing for their grandkids as well.
Can I just ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the city government could impose a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures for people who don't have sufficient money to make their rent payments work, and have
I don't
a
think they
way
have
of
that
funding that?
Yeah, do you think, I haven't heard of any kind of way that could happen, just because the landlord has rights to, to get their rent paid by the tenant.
I think
But
it's
with mandatory
partial.
rescheduling,
I think
maybe
it
a
could.
fund, a public fund that would make up the difference.
Well, that's what I was going to suggest, having a fund to prevent homelessness. Because I worked at the school district as a social worker for 18 years, and I just saw so many families who were just one paycheck away. And as Olivia said, it could be asthma medicine or, some little thing, but for them it was a huge thing that would come up, and then that's their next rent check, and they end up then facing eviction. And so I would love to see a fund, and we used to have, homeless prevention funds, but they were so restricted that you couldn't use them. And as a school social worker, I used to call Julianne all the time and I'd say, is there any way we could use this? Because otherwise we're going to end up with 7 kids homeless. Like, why can't our community, why can't we just come up with a way of preventing the homelessness instead of having these 7 kids on the street? And I love that Olivia brought up about the awareness issue, because really the family homelessness is the hidden homeless. They can't be, as a social worker who would make defects reports all the time, like, we can't have children on the street, we can't have children in cars. Those kids are taken from that mother, if that's the situation, if we hear about it. So they're not the people panhandling downtown, and that's why our commissioners and our mayors and everyone else, they don't see that. What they see is what the businesses downtown are seeing, and they're being, they're very aware of the image, and we don't affect the image. Our kids, our families don't affect the image because nobody sees them. They don't see them. So I think the awareness part is huge. And then the other thing, there is a fund called Independent Agency Funding. I don't know if anybody here knows about it. I don't really know very much, but Shay, the director of the homeless shelter, she talks about this all the time. It's money that's set aside in the annual budget at the city level to supplement agencies that provide fundamental necessary services for the community. We don't get any of that. Like, why don't we get it? I don't know if Habitat gets it, I don't know if Athens Land Trust gets it, but we don't get it at all. So I would like to see the family, any of us who are serving families, I'd like to see us getting at least a part of that, or some of it, because, that's they're making these decisions, but it's not coming to families.
Do you know if it's in the public domain, the spending, how they spend this fund, the independent agency funding?
Do you know anything?
So they release a report. It's very deep down. Are you asking about access of who receives it?
Yes.
There is a
publicly
report, and
available?
it's I think it was like on page 30 or something like that. And they, yes, it is publicly available because we were able to get access to it. But is it really accessible? I think that that could be an awareness of the city of saying, did you know that this information, that there is independent agency funding, and maybe there could be a more strategic effort in that to address the specific things like housing for families, especially since it's growing so rapidly.
So, which employers are people working for that they make so little that they can lose, they can become homeless
I can
any
answer
month?
that. Yeah, like Mary said, yeah, definitely fast food. The poultry plants, the Pilgrim's Pride is a huge employer of people who don't have their GED, or well, some of them do, but it's one of the few places in Athens that pays a decent wage. I think it's like 11 or 12 an hour, about 12 an hour now. it's hard work. A lot of our clients have worked there, but. What's that? Okay, good, I didn't know that. But, it's easy to lose your job there because you get points, like for each, violation that you make. Like if you're late one day, you get a point. Like there's just a certain number of points you can only have within like 90 days and then you get cut. So it's not really feasible for our clients to have that type of punitive system because our clients have children. We only work with families and children get sick. So, especially we work with so many single moms, not all, we work with, two-parent homes as well. But, it's just so easy to slip in terms of that type of criteria, like strict criteria with also no kind of benefits. Like if a woman or man needs a day off, they don't get paid for that day. I mean, it's not like if, I don't know what everyone's job is in here, but I know for me, if I take a day off, I don't worry about it. I'll still get my salary. But our clients don't have that luxury.
I just want to interject some national figures on housing rentals. You need nationally, in virtually every American city, to earn at least $17.50 an hour to be able to rent a one-bedroom apartment. To rent a two-bedroom apartment, you have to earn at least $22 per hour. And 3/4 of Americans have no more than $700 on hand.
Right.
So you can see how people can be working and be homeless in our society.
So do you think some kind of a campaign in each of the workplaces where people become aware, the employers become aware of the problems that people are facing would work or should be initiated?
I'm not sure. I think that we would have to really check with folks that are either working with Pilgrim's Pride, things like that. But it's also institutions like the University of Georgia.
It's UGA too. Yeah, it's the
That's really
staff positions at UGA pay very little.
And there's not an opportunity for advancement as reliable as you are, and that's kind of a larger institution that could be held a bit more accountable.
Well, and also, I mean, one of the key things I think we need to do is hold government accountable for driving up the cost of housing. I mean, just what you all were explaining. I mean, we dealt with this in Brooklyn, New York, like 30 years ago, but we went after the city managers, and I mean, we really put a lot of citizens put a lot of pressure on those folks because that drove up the. I mean, it's not just that you have to earn more money, but you have to stop that process that drives up the cost of housing, and government is a key player in that. Of course, we don't have our city commissioners here, but.
Yeah, so I'll kind of represent Athens for everyone in some capacity. I'm part of the housing initiative through Athens for Everyone. I co-chair that with Claire Bolton. She couldn't be here tonight. But through that initiative, we're trying to address some of these issues. We've been having several conversations. We have monthly meetings where we convene around conversations such as this, and everything is brought up from people experiencing homelessness to people in minority neighborhoods being driven out, gentrification. But I want to share some of the things that we're working on, but also even some of my opinions about housing here in Athens. I'm glad somebody brought up the University of Georgia because I was about to bring it up because they put enormous pressure on some of the neighborhoods that are experiencing gentrification from people outside of Athens buying up properties and homes and renting them out for students in some of the neighborhoods, especially in some of the multi-family neighborhoods. You see a lot in East Athens where I serve and where my business is located. It's experiencing rapid gentrification right now, and out of scale housing is being developed in those areas that are shooting up people's property taxes. There is a homestead exemption for the certain seniors that live in that community in that area, But once those people transition onto the other side of life, those people that inherit that property, those taxes shoot up to the market rate. And a lot of times, the people that inherit the property cannot keep up with that, extra rate. But from what, Representative Fry was saying earlier about how they created that ordinance in single-family zone neighborhoods that, more than 200 people living, because of those higher end or, middle-class neighborhoods were experiencing a lot of students kind of moving in. Once they passed that ordinance, those students started moving in other areas, put more pressure on areas where they were able to do that. So when you put, certain policies in one area, it has effects in other places. Somebody on the planning department saying the same thing about the infill housing ordinance. That's kind of when I got involved with housing, probably about 4 or 5 years ago. They were having conversations about infill housing and how we address that in town. And one thing that I learned through that conversation was it was brought about from a neighborhood association in 5 Points who were raising their voices about these big fraternity houses that was coming through Millage. That type of out-of-scale development was even affecting their neighborhood and their property taxes. So they, organized and raised their voices to address some of that. And but the ordinance only applies to single-family zone neighborhoods. It doesn't apply to multi-family zones. So I was, thinking like, what protections are for those type of neighborhoods, which most of those neighborhoods have a large African American population in them. So from having conversations with the planning department about that, we didn't really come up with any solid solutions in my mind. But some of the things that Athens for Everyone was able to do in lieu of some of those conversations was to begin to kind of base build. So we help neighborhoods, mostly minority neighborhoods, to organize around issues that they're experiencing in their neighborhood. Over in East Athens, Triangle Plaza area, we've been trying to start a neighborhood association over there. We feel like that's one thing that the local government could assist with, organizing neighborhood associations in some of those underrepresented neighborhoods, as well as certain tax programs or progressive tax things that they could do to help ease some of that pressure that's being put on some of these neighborhoods. One thing that we would love to see through Athens for Everyone is some type of affordable housing, or identifying, because we have a trust fund here in Athens Clarke County that is built for affordable housing, but identifying some type of funding mechanism that can definitely go towards making that more sustainable and more robust. So increasing our affordable housing trust here in Athens Clarke County, preserving, rehabilitating, something, and building more affordable housing, of course, is one of our things that we want to focus on. But we try to look at housing, through a racial justice lens as well, from the historic things that happen, like programs like, before the FHA, started putting more regulations on it, they were kind of exclusive to who they gave home loans to. And the banks were definitely complicit in that process of keeping African Americans, out of those wealth-building mechanisms. So we would love to see some type of racial justice aspect, investing in housing value discrimination and raising more awareness around that in African American neighborhoods. Part of what we want to see too is more education around certain things, like planning and zoning. We do teach-ins at our monthly meetings with Athens for Everyone. We bring in various groups that do housing justice or housing initiatives, and we have them, explain and lay out some of the things that they're working on, and finding ways to kind of collaborate to make our ask more strong to our local government, and of course putting pressure on the university, because they don't pay property taxes, but they own a bunch of land here in this community. So they could, impose some type of payment in lieu of taxes. Other universities have done that before, and I think that was on a local level, if I'm not mistaken. So I would love to see them do some things like that, as well as there was one more thing that I I was thinking of. Man, just escaped my mind, but those are just, you know, a few of the things that we've been discussing through the Athens for Everyone Housing Initiative. We definitely want more people to become, you know, involved in the organization. I can give out information on when we meet. What was the other thing? Oh yeah, I know what it was. So also encouraging our local government to buy parcels of land, large parcels of land, and hold it for future redevelopment or low-income housing development. You know, right now I think our local government is kind of focusing on affordable rental properties, or at least that's the conversation that I heard they were having through like their HUD department here locally. They were trying to look at creating an affordable rental stock. I think that was one of their goals for this upcoming years. I think that's, you know, I think that could work out if it's done, you know, properly. You know, they've done one redevelopment over in Columbia Brookside, you know, with that project, you know, once Jack R. Wells or Pardo. One of our concerns though is making sure that those people, if they do another development like that in like public housing, you know, places that we have in Athens, is to make sure that the people are not displaced and they have an opportunity to return. You know, put a people first approach. You know, making sure that they know their rights, they know their different options, they're aware of everything. And what we were told is that, you know, Rick Parker and his staff made sure that people were aware of what was going on in that Columbia Brookside thing. One of their representatives actually came to one of our meetings last month and let us know, like, this many people, you know, moved in, this many people had options, but took their vouchers, this many people, you know, moved to other counties and that thing, like, and things of that nature. So we've been kind of trying to stay abreast of some of those conversations that have been happening. I think that's, you know, about it, you know, for right now. You have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Thank you for that summation of everything you're doing. I'm sure you've seen Elizabeth Warren's new proposal, housing development proposal, where she has proposed to provide grants to low-income people, with those who have been in red-lined areas taking priority. So that is, I'd be happy to. I just wondered how much federally that could impact us locally, and you know, does the local government work and interface with the federal government to manage the same stock, or is it totally different stock?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
Spencer might know
be
something.
on that.
Yeah, I can send you some information.
Can I ask you a question? You were mentioning that Athens for Everyone was thinking about some kind of fee that could be imposed upon the university, and maybe more generally on all of those people all of those organizations that have some kind of status where they don't pay any property tax. And then the question is, what would be done with that fees? And I'm thinking of the question of the thought of having some kind of backup fee to prevent people from being evicted or foreclosed upon. And it would allow, if need be, payments to be rescheduled. This, of course, involves not only people who are low-wage earners and may have a medical emergency or some other emergency, but people who are now in neighborhoods where the taxes are going up because of gentrification. So I'm wondering, do you have some sense of the scale of how large a fund would be to keep people from becoming homeless? And do you have a sense of what could be gotten from the kind of fee you're thinking about, and whether that could be enough to set up some municipal fee to protect people against eviction and foreclosure?
Seems like it would have to be pretty large.
I say that also
I
because.
don't know what
yeah.
that means, nonetheless.
Because there are two sides to homeless issues you're indicating. On the one hand, we have people who are homeless, and you could think about how much it would cost to build housing they could have.
Or renovate the existing.
Or renovate. Then the other side of it is how much funding would have to be available to keep people from becoming evicted homeless. And to think of how the city could come up with those resources. SPLOST might be one avenue. Fees might be another.
I think,
A notion I had relatively recently is not precisely a fee, but to try to get sales taxes on game day parking. That it's a huge thing. It's a way where people who own like undeveloped land capitalize it on it, but it's I don't know, mostly a cash business. So, and anyway, it would be a way to move resources from people who have undeveloped land into the kitty.
By the way, I want to welcome Melissa Link, who is the first district commissioner to have come to this meeting. And
Yeah, sorry I'm late. I
and
had
we've
like
been
4 other
discussing various
things.
possibilities that city government could take. What are your thoughts on what the city government could do to deal with our housing problems?
Well, we had this conversation with the Federation of Neighborhoods Monday night. And, you know, we are limited by revenue sources. Like there are state restrictions on things like real estate transfer taxes and, you know, mandatory inclusionary zoning and impact fees. And those are all kinds of things that other communities do. That's where they find their resources to put into housing. And also, you know, I don't know if Spencer talked about this already, but there are federal restrictions, you know, against just giving people money.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, you can't.
State restrictions.
State restrictions. You can't. Do you want to talk about it, that gratuities clause?
Yeah, and I didn't want to, I'll explain.
You understand it better than I do.
So we've been researching the idea of how can we get the state involved into the housing issues, because Georgia has some of the lowest home ownership rates of the South. South is the lowest in the nation. Seems like Georgia continues to be ground zero for almost every significant major social problem.
Right.
We will try, we're working on fixing them, I promise. But that's one of them, and the idea is that, okay, how can we get Department of Community Affairs, who handles our federal dollars and disperses them through our communities, to be able to focus on the concepts of, and specifically for us, through Habitat homeownership, right? So I'm not saying that there's not space for other avenues, and so don't take that as being, I'm saying this is the only thing there is. But specifically as it revolves around homeownership, we've been researching the idea that the state could actually, through its budget, put fund into DCA, who only spends about $4.5 million a year on homeownership programs, which are federal money anyway. So just like Athens, the state doesn't have any skin in the game as far as our homeless, our housing funds are concerned. The problem is, constitutionally, when we changed the Constitution, it was a very necessary thing to do apparently, they have stopped the states, and it has been expanded to the municipalities from taking tax dollars and giving them to private entities of any sort, right? And that would be a nonprofit still as a private entity. So there's a preclusion in our Constitution called the gratuities clause that limits our ability to use dollars for the private interest. What we're trying to do is figure out how there's a significant public benefit to investing state tax dollars and municipal tax dollars into low-cost housing opportunities, right? So we give Mercer state dollars because they give us doctors, right? And we give other institutions state dollars that are private, but that benefit, the significant public benefit is weighed out. And so that's what we're in the process of doing right now, is if we can make sure that housing can be defined as a significant public benefit to the state and then the communities, then we're gonna be able to hopefully cut loose a little bit of the idea that these things can't be done. But that's a major policy change as far as the state is concerned. But we were really, I've been working on it all year long, actually.
Wouldn't you be able to do that if the city government became the entity to which you were going to give money rather than nonprofits?
Right, so the Constitution states, okay, yeah, you can, the legislature can't do it. And then probably to keep some people in check that were doing some pretty bad stuff. And so then you move into that through the judges have determined that legislature means state and municipalities also. So municipalities are even restricted, but they could do it through authorities. Okay, so an authority would be a whole different animal. It gets all in the weeds here, but there's not a real way. For example, what we were discussing is home ownership. There is a way that the county could be like a housing authority, right? Because they would get all the money and then they could use the rents and then, I mean, you know, that you could operate a county,
Circulate
a municipal
public benefit.
housing authority. But it's the ownership aspect of it and the private aspect of it, when those tax dollars actually leave the state or the government and then go to that private entity is where we're trying to bridge that gap.
I mean, the game's kind of rigged against home ownership.
Yes,
Wow.
it is.
It really is, which is scary because a lot of families that, you know, are in public housing lost their